Hello and welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby podcast as we head into our penultimate round of the VKT United Rugby Championship, and still so much to be decided between the top four seeds in the table, who's going to make up the playoffs, and quite the bottleneck developing in that middle third of the table as well, heading into the last two matches. We'll also touch on some of the new law changes coming in effect from this summer. One or two of them met with a lukewarm reception in the last week. Before that, though, Bernard Jackman and Jonny Holland are with me to run through last weekend's URC games and look ahead to this weekend. First things first, before we actually talk about the quality of rugby itself, I was at the RDS Saturday evening. Birch, I know you were at Thomond Park.
Yes.
How nice was it to just get out there and watch a rugby match in lovely sunny weather and not be wrapped up from the wind and rain and all the elements? It was the most joyous weekend I can remember.
Yeah, it was incredible, and like big crowds. You know, I thought the atmosphere in Thomond Park as well, and Munster gave their fans something to cheer about. Like Roundtree has admitted, their home form hasn't been where they want it to be. They've been better away from home, but I think that was a brilliant home performance. Just obviously heading into the business end of the season and putting themselves in a position where they could be at home for a long time in the playoffs as well. So I watched the RDS game. And just Leinster just cut loose, didn't they, in that good weather?
Does make you wonder, Jonny, what could we do if we ever turn this into a summer sport?
I was just going to say, is it a summer sport? Because it's certainly, even from an enjoyment perspective, from a game plan and strategy perspective, when you're dealing with a team across the season, you need a game that's going to win when the ground gets hard, but you need a game that's going to get you points when it's horrible in the middle of the winter. Like, so there's nearly two game plans, which we actually see from Munster at the moment, where I think their strength is that they're able to use a couple of different strategies now. Obviously, the clarity from coaches maybe, and the carry and the follow through from players. I think that only comes when you're quite certain of what you're supposed to be about, and they're able to play different games. Even at the Lions, when it was hard ground and sun, they played a different game. But yeah, it would be nice to be able to wear the shorts and get a bit of warmth into your bones sometimes when you're coaching rugby.
Yeah, let's see what we get this weekend. I'm over at the sports ground, so we'll see how we do. We'll start with Ulster though, because they brought the big news of the week. On Monday, they confirmed Richie Murphy as their permanent head coach on a 2-year contract. Bert, I know you were talking about it on Against the Head. You think it's a good appointment. Jonny, we were discussing it last week, yourself and Jonny Murphy, saying, you thought that the time was right to actually, give him the reins and see how he does. So I presume from that point of view, you also think it's a good appointment from Ulster?
I think so. Like we've been saying about, Irish pathways and stuff like that, and coaching seems to be difficult at the best of times. But someone like Richie, Bert said it on Against the Head, his pathway through AIL, Leinster Academy, Irish senior setup, Irish under-20s as the head man, I just think it's perfect. And he knows a lot of those players. He knows the Irish system. He can link well with the RFU. I'm sure there's many reasons that I don't know. This whole thing kind of works from a logistical perspective. And he's just a good coach as well. By all accounts, I met him down here in Musgrave Park by chance. The 20s were training before the schools games were on, and I was commentating on that. So just bumped into him. But I don't know why he's obviously he's been spoken about a lot more, and people talking about how good a man manager he is and all this kind of stuff. So like maybe it's the right time for Ulster to get people on board and there's a massive amount of turnover there. So having someone who can deal with people is going to be very, very important for them over the next 2 seasons. So it's great to be able to see someone like Richie going into that. But I think it's also like you look at Noel McNamara gone to South Africa, over to France. It's time to get him back somewhere eventually. And there's others, obviously Raj. Like it'd be nice to get a lot of Irish coaches back into the Irish system because there's enough talent out there.
Yeah, and that's something Bert, you've kind of brought up that as well a few times in the last couple of years, that we seem to be very, very good at producing coaches, but in recent years, and I got a bit of blowback because I left out Leo Cullen with this when I said it was great to see an Irish coach getting a job at one of the provinces. I meant in terms of recent appointments, where we seem to be very, very good at producing coaches, but we don't seem to be very, very good at giving them jobs in the Irish system.
I think this is a really good example of hopefully a sea change in that, because I agree. There's lots of really good Irish coaches who are coaching abroad. We have seen some of them come back. Obviously, Prendy from from Racing. John Bell obviously had lots of experience in the UK over a long period. Now he's back at Ulster, but this one is a little bit different because it's actually given. Mark Sexton, I suppose, was a good example as well, because he had been coaching at club level at St Mary's, coaching St Mary's School, was doing some underage in Leinster. And then obviously became the under-20s backs coach and got an opportunity. So to go to Connacht and Academy, and then obviously promoted. So he's a good story. But Richie as well, because he has. It's sometimes when you get pigeonholed as a skills coach with a senior team, it's very difficult to make that jump. And obviously, probably a lot of people would have said, "Oh, it's a risk to go down to the under-20s because effectively it's a step back," But it was a step back to become his own man to a certain extent, and has got the results with that. And now he's got the opportunity to coach one of the provinces. So it's a great success story for him, and hopefully it goes really well. And it's very, I think that's probably an area there. If you look at the coaching program and development, I think it's the hard one is to find opportunities for coaches within the system without them having to travel, because a lot of them can't travel, for family reasons, etc. So it's and it's very narrow. There's not many opportunities in Ireland either. So it's a tricky one to get right. But I think a little bit more personal care of those coaches and trying to help make a roadmap for them would certainly help them and keep people in the game, or get people into the game. I know people who I think would have made great coaches, but there was a lack of a clear pathway, and they went down a different route, and that's fine. It's a very high level, but I think I'd be afraid that we would miss one or two as well that go for something that has a clear road to the top. Which, as a player, it's kind of pretty easy to see what you need to do to get to the top, but as a coach, sometimes it's a little bit more misty.
Yeah, so he's he's right in at the deep end when it comes to his first couple of matches after being given the job permanently. Leinster at home this weekend, and then in 2 weeks' time, Munster away. Sixth place in the URC at the moment with 2 games to play. They're on 49 points. They're 5 ahead of Connacht, who are back in ninth. Trying to read through a couple of predictions of results over the next few weeks. My guess would be, I reckon they probably just about are safe in terms of the playoffs. They're probably still a little bit anxious over, is it going to be 7th or 8th that'll be needed to secure Champions Cup rugby. But they're in a better position, I suppose, than we might have thought they were going to be in a few weeks ago. Jonny, we spoke last week about how that game against the Scarlets, they just had to go out there, get their bonus point win, and come home. For a while, it didn't look like that was going to happen. It wasn't a particularly good first half from them, but they got it done, and they're taking on Leinster this weekend. Kind of don't really know what we're going to get from Leinster in terms of team selection, and they have caused Leinster problems over the last few years as well, in fairness, and beat them on earlier in the season as well. One win in these next 2 games should probably be enough, but the question is, are they going to be good enough to get it?
Yeah, one win. I think we spoke about it being Scarlets, because once you get into the next two, it's very difficult. You can't guarantee yourself any win, but also pick up points, and you could end up getting there. Now, like you said, I think they're good enough. They could cause Leinster trouble. I know Leinster obviously have an eye on something else, but at the same time, Leinster have a very competitive squad, and I think they're approaching things a little bit differently. They've got the return of Hugo Keenan and James Ryan, and trying to get Gary Ringrose back out there. I think that's a bit too soon, isn't it? So I think they've just got too good a squad at the moment to fear Ulster up in Ulster. But Ulster are they're obviously a very proud club, and they perform when the chips are down, So I think for Richie, we had a similar situation my last year in Munster, where we were trying to get sixth spot at the time, and it is a massive kind of motivational factor. You cannot miss out on Champions Cup rugby or Heineken Cup rugby when it was. Um, and it creates a backs against the wall kind of situation for a team in sixth. You might not think that they're gunning for as much as Leinster or someone at the top of the table. Of course they are, and they probably feel, we speak about that quite openly about, Champions Cup qualification, but a team like that it's in sixth are talking about what Munster did last year, and if you just scrape in, you go up and you'll find a performance when you get to knockout rugby, and there's no reason why Ulster shouldn't be in their own changing room and centre saying, we'll storm this thing. No one's looking at us. They all think we're we're just trying to keep it together to get qualification for next year. So I'm sure they'd be thinking. I think I've learned that lesson when you talk about a club or a team or a person. They're thinking the whole lot. Like, they want to win the thing. So now obviously objectively when you're from the outside, you can kind of say, well, that's unrealistic. But because they have two very difficult weeks ahead of them. But like you said, they've caused Leinster a bit of trouble in the past. So if they get a bit gritty, Leinster have made their own mistakes. I think Leinster have, like we saw them going back to 14 all at the weekend, and the Kieran Frawley one was a bit. I wouldn't say it's harsh because it's right, like, but it was just a little bit one error, and all of a sudden it's a big swing in points. So I think they've made a couple of errors, and if you can get their eyes on next week and get a few errors early on, and all of a sudden Ulster have something to play for, they're definitely there for the taking. But when you see them, I think the thing with Leinster is, and we spoke with it last week, they're a bit unstructured at the moment, which might cause a couple of errors at times, but then it results in 61 points at other times, like, so it's mental what they're doing. I do think a little bit of discipline in Leinster. It feels like, and I could be wrong on this, but it feels like when Lancaster was there, it was all very process driven, no errors, no discipline issues. With Jack Nienaber there, it feels like will suck up a couple of mistakes and a couple of penalties maybe to get the end result that they can get at 61 points. So sorry, yeah, long-winded answer, but I think Ulster can do the business if they are up against it though.
What do you think, Birch?
It's highly unlikely. I think the results have been much better than the performances. But I think every win they get will go a little bit towards healing, their self belief and their mindset and the vibe up there. And I think just the fact that Richie's been announced. I say the players probably knew last week, but he's been announced will give them a little bit of security around the future. People can start having conversations around contracts, and there's been more positivity. Like, it's not ideal going into the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season not knowing who's basically going to be looking after you next year. So I think that's a real positive move. But you couldn't back them on form. I think Leinster will want a big performance again going into the final. They need points. They're desperate to get back to one. They're in danger of missing out on two if they lose. So I wouldn't expect any slip ups.
Like, chuck in the injuries then on top of it. We're not just necessarily saying Ulster aren't good enough to beat Leinster, but they also are depleted at the moment. Ian Henderson's done for the rest of the season, and South Africa. Tom O'Toole's out for this weekend. James Hume just had his ACL surgery last week, and we wish him the best of luck. Luke Marshall, concussion. Rob Balakoon is out, and then you've Marty Moore, Jake Flannery, Ben Moxham, and Callum Reid all on the longer term list. So, like, there's a long list of important players there that are unavailable. I do want to name check one player who's come out of the last few months quite well, and he was so unlucky not to score a try at the weekend, Birch. Cormac Izuchukwu, who really has actually, he's someone that's been kind of quietly spoken about for the last few years because of his sevens background, and seems to have a great athletic ability, and this kind of hybrid second slash back row that we seem to be producing a lot of now, where these guys have great engines and really, really good speed, and we're starting to see it in the last few months.
Yeah, he's getting a run of games now, a little bit due to injuries, but also I think Richie's just gone with him, and he's showing all the quality that we've been hearing about for the last 3 or 4 years. We've seen little glimpses. His body's let him down a little bit as well. Like he had a little bit of game time under Dan. I know Dan raised him really highly, but then his body would break and he'd be injured for a period of time and then struggle to get back in. His story, I mean, he hasn't come through the private school route. He's raw, a bit like Ryan Baird a little bit, where he has just the capacity to have big moments. And I think Ulster have lacked, like Timney's been brilliant for them, but at 6, there's kind of been a lot of chopping and changing over the last since Stephen Ferris, really. No one's really nailed it down. And based on what we're seeing from him, he's somebody with another preseason under his belt. Could be future international for Ulster.
Yeah, I found, like you said there, they never seem to nail down a 6. I found under Dan McFarlane that I could always confidently predict two of the back row week on week. But then you had, Marcus Ray, Matty Ray drop gun in and out, Dave Ewers this season, Cormac Izuchukwu. There was just a long list of instability there in terms of selection. Jonny, would you have come across Izuchukwu much through the AIL? Did you? I know, like he would have been in and out with Ballynahinch based on when he was made available by Ulster. Did you come up against him with Cork?
Yeah, we come up against him earlier in the year. I can't remember the latest game, but he definitely was in and out for Ballynahinch, and they were getting a lot of availability through Ulster, and the Ulster clubs were getting a lot of availability. I think they changed their tune on that, and we're playing a lot of players. And all of a sudden, Ballynahinch, you could mostly predict it, and they're a great club, but all of a sudden, someone like him comes back into it, and you just put a bit of a they've already got a hard nose in that pack, and then you put someone as athletic as that into it as well, and their lineout gets even stronger and athletic, like I said. So yeah, I've definitely come across him. He's a great player. But I think if you look at the tools that Richie has at his disposal at the moment, like I think Dave McCann has been really good for them as well. And
Yeah.
you know, the turnover at the end of the game where he's counter rucking to get the ball off the pitch, like moments like that, I think he's been quite good. Um, Harry Sheridan was at Trinity, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And I've come across him a bit. He's another hybrid, like you know, he can go into the row and the back row. So they've got. I know you can't have all kind of younger fellas that are worth the punt. Maybe not younger anymore, really, in the grand scheme of things. But they've got a lot of raw materials there where they've got players that can come through and be with Ulster for the next 10 years, is what I mean. You know, so he's one of them, definitely. And when you look at that athletic ability, like of Ryan Baird, but also Tom Ahern, like he's another fella like that just has explosive power and good physical presence.
Yeah, more on Tom Ahern later. On Leinster though, uh, James Ryan and Hugo Keenan, you mentioned earlier on. I think Leinster have been fairly clear that they're trying to get them minutes this weekend. Gary Ringrose is on the we'll wait and see list for later this week, Birch. If Ringrose doesn't play this week, do you put him straight into a match day 23 next week for a Champions Cup final, or do you think they're going to have to leave it off?
Um, I don't because I don't put him in because I think they're going to go 6-2. So that's the only thing that would put me off. Or actually, you have to start him. You have to start him. That's a big ask. I think ideally he would get some game time this week. I think that the Osborne Robbie Henshaw partnership has had a good bit of time out recently to gel and looks strong.
I thought Henshaw at the weekend
Yeah,
was absolutely class.
100%. He's flying. So it's just like I rate Gary Ringrose obviously as everyone does, but it's a big ask for him to come in with no game time. I really hoped he would get minutes this week, and I think from reading between the lines, he's not even fully in full contact this week. Yeah, or maybe not the start of the week. So it'll be a real race for him. Really positives. Obviously, you have Hugo and James Ryan. Hopefully going to be fit because I think it'll just either obviously Hugo will probably start, but and yeah, James Ryan and Hugo will probably start against Toulouse, but it makes your bench stronger as well. But I think they go 6-2 on the bench against Toulouse, and ideally for them would be Frawley, on the bench covering multiple positions rather than someone like Gary. I know Gary can play wing as well, but they need someone who can play 10.
Jonny, it's a Leinster in this kind of weird situation now where they haven't been in previous years, where they really, really do need to win these matches leading up to a big European game. Okay, I know last year, I suppose the week before the Champions Cup final, they had the Munster game in the semi final, but I think with hindsight, a lot of people would say they probably didn't take it as seriously as they should have. Does this need to win and need to like they're desperate to get a top seed because they want home advantage all the way to a URC final if they get there? Do you think that like the importance of these matches is going to stand to them come next week at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium?
I do, and I think the expectation shifting away from them is going to stand to the chip that Jack is going to put on their shoulder as well. So I think they're dangerous in this position now because there's no expectation. The last couple of years was massive expectation. No, sorry, there's still huge expectation on Leinster as always, but I think it's just shifted a small bit. Oh, geez, they're up against Toulouse, and Toulouse have the back line and the pack that La Rochelle should have had, but they were a bit out in their feet. So I think the favourites tag has gone from them a small bit, and that's probably a very, very dangerous thing to do to Leinster. So um, they're going to unleash, and whether it's on Ulster and Toulouse or one or the other, I don't know. But they're massively dangerous, and I do think that's going to help them. The competition in their squad, it seems to be frighteningly high at the moment with the likes of Osborne coming through, and I think Gary Ringrose, like Bert is right in terms of like he needed game time this week, and but he is clearly someone that you'll still take a punt on if they're talking about him in the conversation when he's so far away from proper training at the moment. Like, but that's probably his leadership qualities. And some things we don't understand from this side, what a fella actually does for a team day in, day out and on the training pitch, and the confidence that they give to other people, the communication they have with other people on the pitch and allow them to do their job. So I think that's where Gary Ringrose is very, very important, Leinster. But from here, we can't see if he's training or not. We can't see if he's showing the glimpses that's needed to actually punt and put him into a starting team against Toulouse. But yeah, I think Leinster are ferociously dangerous when you're talking about them like this, because the desperation, like you said, the need for these trophies is very, very high. And they've obviously got the tools and the resources to go and get both.
Yeah, and you mentioned Nienaber, obviously, but from what I've seen of Chasing the Sun, Nienaber is going to have them convinced next week. They're David going up against Goliath. Like, that just seems to be the way they operate. First, before we finish up on Leinster, on the pod last week we were talking about Tadhg Furlong and how he seems to be looking as good as he has for a few years. Then on Saturday he comes up with a big opening 2 minutes of the game, throwing that long pass out towards the touchline, which sets up the opening try from deep. He's got an offload in there. He's coming up at first receiver more and more. He has that little kick down into the 22, which I know ultimately came to nothing, but I always find there's a noise a crowd makes when a front five forward kicks the ball that is unlike any other noise you hear in a match. It's not quite the same level as a try, but it's far louder than like a jackal turnover or something like that. I find it fascinating. But anyway, the wider point, Tadhg Furlong seems to be loving his rugby at the moment.
Yeah, he obviously, his body must be in a good place, and his mind in a good place. He's fresh. He's just getting so many touches. There's a real edge to him. I thought against La Rochelle, he stood up as a real leader in terms of his actions, and I think he's stepping into that void a little bit that with Jonny gone, to be the main talisman for them, and it's going to be absolutely crucial. Against Cyril Boy, against that Toulouse forward pack. Leinster need Porter, Furlong, Dan Sheehan. I think playing 65, 70 minutes for him to win, but it's really heartening. I don't know if he'll play this weekend. I think maybe he'll bench this weekend, but he is going to be a key man, as he has been for most of his career. But I suppose we're just seeing him really back to his best at the moment, and it's great to see. Speaking of him kicking the ball, someone sent me some videos of him playing football down in Wexford Park back in the day.
Yeah.
He was well able to move. But no, he enjoyed it, I think.
Yeah, he certainly did, I'd say. Let's move on to Munster and Connacht then. And we spoke about how nice it was to sit back and watch rugby in beautiful weather over the weekend, and Munster put on a show. I do think, Jonny, though, I still have questions over Munster if for example on Friday evening in Edinburgh the skies opened and the rain started bucketing down. But if the weather holds up and they get nice fast tracks to play on and good conditions, they really, really do seem to be clicking.
Yeah, they do. No, I think they can probably play, like when you look at the Tadhg Byrne RG Snyman combination in the second row, maybe you look at their pack in total and think, if they come up against a big pack, will they be able to do it? But at the same time, I think, hopefully the weather holds up and they get a chance to show what they're about, because they really are clicking. And I think the Simon Zebo airplane was the icing on the cake. I think it was, good form inside in Thomond Park. The rugby opened up, and then seeing something like that would bring you back a small bit. And chance of one more year and everything else. But yeah, I think like even there was definitely moments where two very soft first phase tries to concede. There was a sticky patch at the start of the second half where Connacht were actually starting to get into the game, and then Nankerville obviously did his thing. That was possibly not on. I think the camera just didn't have an angle on it. Did they? Gavin Coombs. I don't know how that ball was dislodged from Bundyaki and wasn't a knock on from Gavin Coombs. I would question that. So there definitely were some like kind of sliding doors moments where the big swings that may not have happened in another game, but like the way they finished it off, obviously they were full value. I think the first 20 minutes they were very dominant. Connacht were probably disappointing, but Munster opened up, and I think that's very important for Irish rugby as well, that another team is actually hitting the heights, because it can't just be all about Leinster all the time.
Yeah, and you touched on something there actually when you mentioned the Simon Zebo running into the airplane celebration when Conor Murray's gone in to score. And like we were doing Munster's media yesterday, and it came up there as well, just in the wider point of they seem to be enjoying their rugby a lot at the moment, and that's really really important. Like I think a couple of months ago, Bert, we were talking about the fact that there was contract stuff that was rumbling on, and it just seemed like everyone seemed a little bit tense out there. But I think in the last couple of weeks, you're actually seeing a group that's really really enjoying what they're doing and expressing themselves really really nicely.
Yeah, like that little bit of tension and angst and frustration, it happens nearly every club every year. At some time, it's how you handle it. And Munster, like if you think about it logically, like Pete's contract dragged on. The Snyman signing for Leinster, results were poor, injuries were horrendous. Next thing, Frisch announces the week of the Northampton game that he wants to leave. There was a lot of things that were happening, but that's all been sorted out. Frisch is now leaving. Munster have replaced him with Tom Farrell, and they have money for a high-profile back three player, it seems. So things have settled a little bit. You know what I mean? They've Snyman is back playing. Like the frustration would have been, you're one of your star players ends up signing for another province. You're not allowed to keep him because of what happened with John Klein, and he's injured. Now he's playing, and it looks like he's doing everything in his power to help Munster retain their URC. And I think the tour to South Africa, and I'm speaking to someone who was around that tour, like apparently the crack and the fun that they have when they're on tour, it was brilliant, and they've just kind of used that. Two great results. It's their trophy. They're back at home now, obviously, or at home against Connacht. They've got Edinburgh and then finish at home, and they're going to be in the playoffs. They may be one or two. So things have definitely improved. I do think though they still need to sort out next year's squad. They do just need to replace Snyman, and obviously a Dogbo maybe is that replacement, but he obviously has to get back from his injury. They said they've replaced Frisch with Tom Farrell, they've replaced Joey Carberry with Billy Burns. But you'd still like a little bit more firepower, I think. And Ankyville's been a brilliant signing.
Yeah.
But they're probably one or two players short to go and be European contenders. And that's where I think Munster really would want to get to underground round three, is back being at the top table of Europe. And I would say being top two in the URC in the regular season every year as well, because that's where Leinster and Munster should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they look like they're really clicking, and in particular, Snyman. And I feel like we're kind of talking about him every week, it seems, Jonny. But I think in fairness, we may as well, because we've had to go so long without talking about what we've been seeing from him on the pitch. And what has he got, 5 tries in 6 games since coming back, and you can kind of see like the impact he has, because he's so big, he's occupying defenders, but then he obviously has that ability to hold the ball up high and create the opportunity for an offload, or even if he doesn't offload, he's pulling in defenders because of that, and that's just creating space all around the pitch. And the impact he's having on Munster in this last third of the season has been absolutely massive.
Yeah, I think when he scored from the tap and go second phase, wasn't it, at the weekend, moments like that might not look like huge moments. Someone got over the line, and Gavin Coombs was doing it last year, But when someone can make life a small bit easier for the rest of the pack and the squad by just getting the extra inch to get over. I know he nearly knocked it on, but
He was tackled about 5 yards short of the line, and he still reached over.
oh, you can go through 4, 5, 7 more phases. You might eventually get there, but that kind of doubt is in your mind sometimes that it's not as easy. But when you have an RG Snyman, easy moments, but hard moments become easy, and you just jog back to the halfway line and you go again. So that's kind of the impact. I actually thought when he was in Japan and these highlight reels came out, I was like, sure, he's playing with kids. Like, there's no way this looks good. And then he kind of has those moments anyway across the URC, so he's unbelievable. But I think what Birch is saying there, I was looking at their squad, I think the other day when I was writing about it, but I was looking at what's leaving, and like I don't I would agree, like I think they're one or two short of having the same impact at the end of the season for next year. I think Joey Carberry like is such a loss. The way Roundtree and Core managing Murray off the bench, managing expectation around players like that is it seems to be really good from the outside at the moment. And if you had that squad fit for the whole year, you'd have to think they do more damage in Europe. But when you're losing some of the caliber that they're losing, Europe becomes the same kind of story again next year, doesn't it? And see where they go. But I think if you had that squad ready to go in the middle of a European season and a small bit of luck or balls about them, you'd have a good surge at that European stuff, So and that's where they need to get to, like Bert just said. But like that, if they can go back to back in the URC, which is obviously very, very difficult to do at any stage, they would get a lot of credit in the bank.
Birch, they seem to be quite smartly kind of getting the most out of their match day squad in the last few weeks. Like the team selections, I think I'd say a lot of people would say in the last few weeks they haven't necessarily picked their best starting 15, but they seem to have picked the best match day 23 that can fill out the 80 minutes. Like people rolled their eyes a bit when I think was it England or something under Eddie Jones when they referred to the bench as the finishers. This is actually a really, really good example of a team picking finishers where you've Ollie Yeager, you've got Tom Ahern, Gavin Coombs has been pulled back onto the bench. And in fairness to Gavin Coombs, he's had to do a lot of unselfish stuff over the last couple of years for Munster, like going into the second row. In the last few weeks, he's had to drop back to the bench because it's probably been better for Munster to have some of those big impact players coming on in the last 15, 20 minutes. Conor Murray as well.
Yeah, it's been a real shift now. I think, in fairness, earlier on the year, they actually didn't have enough players available to be able to think like that. But I certainly think that the Northampton games, both of them, I know there were sick illness in the squad in the second game, in the knockout match, but there was that element of, do we have a bench? And I think South Africa, they played around with it a little bit. And if you listen to any of their coaches now, they're highlighting the importance of that. Do you know what I mean? They're kind of nearly praising the likes of Gavin Coombs for, I suppose, not sulking and understanding what the role he has to play, this week, and maybe next week it'll be Jack O'Donoghue or Hodnett or whatever, or Murray, as you mentioned, or Carberry, and it could be Crowley. So that's really important for them, and they do need every game now is won is that teams are evenly matched, is won by the 23 as a whole, and I think Munster are starting to, they have enough players back fit now to be able to use that a little bit smarter.
Finally, then on Munster, Jonny, Ian Henderson is ruled out for the summer tour of South Africa, obviously. Do you think Tom Ahern's ears pricked up when he heard that news?
They'd have to, but unfortunately, do you see the tackle that he got injured in? That's so innocuous. He was actually very low.
It looks like he's probably going to. He did, according to Andy Kiriaki yesterday, he got through himself and Jack Crowley both got through most of training yesterday. So it looks like they have a good chance of being available for this weekend. So I don't think he's going to lose much time off the back of that anyway.
Good, because I think he's in a ferocious position that he's storming everything. That try from the lineup just shows his athletic ability. Played a fullback, didn't he? With Water Park. So,
Yeah.
He's a freak. He's an absolute freak. They don't come around too often. You'd love to see what the likes of Andy Farrell could do for him, because obviously, like we saw Jack Crowley, and everyone thought he had high potential, and all of a sudden he went into Irish camp, and it just accelerated his belief and another coaching staff believing that he could run the show, and we've seen where he went to. It doesn't work out for everyone like that, but Tom Ahern is a guy that I think you just back him a small bit, a run of games, and all of a sudden you have a different animal altogether. So I do think it'll be a great opportunity for him, but it's competitive. Forward pack in Ireland is always competitive, and it depends on what way they treat the likes of Ryan Baird and those, how they use them. So I don't think he's nailed on by any means, but it's a good opportunity if they want to explore what he's about and where his ceiling is at.
Birch, let's talk about Connacht then, because they're in trouble now. Back in ninth, they are 4 points off Benetton, who are eighth. They're playing the Stormers at home this weekend, who desperately need a win as well. And then they've got Leinster the following week, or 2 weeks later in the last round away, with Leinster potentially needing to win to have a chance of getting that top seed. Pete Wilkins basically said yesterday it's playoff rugby from this week, and he's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong, and it's going to be really interesting how they bounce back. I mean, in fairness to the team, during the year when they have had really kind of soul-destroying losses, I'm thinking of the Lions at home, where they got absolutely hammered. They did show grit the following week. I think it was against Benetton, and probably, so they have done that before, but I don't know. It's an Irish derby like that where Wilkins has been very smart. He wouldn't commit to how many points he needed, but I think I would be shocked if they didn't think to get something out of that game, whether it's a bonus point for 4 tries or whether it's a losing bonus point. And they were just blown away from early in the game when Jack Crowley kicked that ball, or Jack Carty kicked that ball dead. They gave away a scrum penalty from the scrum. Then they gave away a line-out maul penalty, and effectively they were just making tackles for the first 20 minutes. And in fairness, they rolled their sleeves up on their line and made Munster work for it after Snyman got that try. But everything was going wrong for them. Their line-out delivery, their line-out execution. I mean, the Thomas Ahern try at the end was from a farcical line-out from Connacht at this stage of the season when people should know their drill. Defensively, set-piece defence, very average. Phase defence, very poor. So, like, they're not things that you can really... You can pull something out of a performance out of nowhere, but you'd like to have a little bit... You'd like to have 2 or 3 areas of your game going really well. And based on the weekend, they have a lot of work to do this week to be able to beat the Stormers. Now, I think the Stormers are loose, so if Connacht were to bring one of their better performances, they could win, but you'd have to fancy Stormers based on how Connacht are defending at the moment in particular.
How big is Mac Hansen not being available this week, Jonny, for Connacht? Well, like, I suppose the way I'd rephrase it is, how greater a chance would you have given them going up against the Stormers if they had Mac Hansen in their team?
Yeah, I saw that doing the rounds, and Mac Hansen's going to make a massive difference. But I was like, if that's coming from the inside and set piece delivery and phase defense, like, I mean, obviously he does make a big difference. You get a star like that with the attitude he brings and the confidence that you pour into other people. It's intangible. You don't know, but I don't know. Like, they talk, and I've spoken to coaches at a certain level in the last couple of weeks, and they talk about having the horses for it, like, and the more depth. We're talking about Munster there and the depth of their bench. Like, everyone that's at that level will make a difference. But I don't know. Maybe he's worth 7 to 10 points, not more than that. They're going to need more to beat Stormers.
I also saw it mentioned in the week, like, the way they're using Bundy Aki. I saw people a little bit critical of it, that kind of not using him to get over the gain line as much and using him as kind of a decoy option. What do you think of how they're using Bundy Aki at the moment?
I was shocked at how quiet he was at the weekend, and I didn't really read into how they were using him. But I don't think they had the ball in the first 20 minutes to maybe use him. I thought it was the game that kind of went away from them, and he didn't have much moments. But if you look at how Ireland were using Bundy Aki, they use him in every different sense of it. He can distribute. That's what makes him so dangerous. Like, he's such a good distributor. He's very agile for the size of him, and I can tell you firsthand that he hurts on the gain line. So it's he's he's got enough to his game to be able to manage that. Like, because the minute they slip off him, he's going to rip up the script and go through the gain line anyway. So, like, I don't know the answer to that, but I just thought he was very quiet. It's one of the poorer games I've seen him play. But I think Connacht set up in a way that they didn't get a grasp on the game. I think they made 81 tackles in the first 25 minutes and 12 missed. That stat is frightening, and Munster were probably disappointed that they didn't get over the line, but they wore them out and wore them out. They had all the ball for 20 minutes, including a couple of Connacht errors, like, but they were just stuttery and stop start. And yeah, maybe you set yourself a target, you get over the line and things become easier. But I think Bundy Aki can play in a number of different ways, and I just didn't think Connacht put him in the right positions, or I don't think they helped themselves at the weekend. It was rudderless at times.
Last point then on Connacht, Birch. Like you mentioned, the Stormers have a habit of being quite loose. How confident are you that Connacht can fix a few things from the weekend and pull off what would be a massive victory?
Hopeful rather than confident. It's just not based on enough evidence. I don't think the Stormers are great. The performance against Dragons was quite poor for a long period.
John Dobson eviscerated the team afterwards.
Yeah, and like, they came here, like, they talked about how they were coming here fully loaded. Like, they're two of the easier fixtures as such. Dragons and Connacht away, they would certainly feel that they could win those. They got okay in first. They ended up getting what they wanted out of the trip to Rodney Parade, but I have to fancy them. There's just too many. Like, Connacht, I think, will announce the players that are leaving probably today or tomorrow, so there'll be a bit of emotion around that, and maybe that'll get performance out of them. But certainly Pete Wilkins will be worried because to lose at home to Stormers, and then obviously that Leinster fixture looks pretty arduous. I actually don't know if not sure that they're not better off being the Challenge Cup defense. I think they might be better off being the Challenge Cup. I think that they just don't have the squad potentially to play those extra games at that level. Yes, but that's a hard thing to convince a board and players as well. When you want to keep players or recruit players, not being the Champions Cup which is a strong possibility now, isn't ideal.
I really want to see a head coach going into the board and say, lads, do you know what? We're better off in the Challenge Cup.
It happens in France all the time, Neil.
You don't get it. Like we're actually...
It happens in France all the time. It's just not part of the Irish culture at the moment.
I'd love to see it. Anyway, that's it on the provinces. I do want to finish up with a few minutes on Friday. World Rugby announced some law changes that are going to come into effect this summer, and a few trials that are going to take place in various World Rugby competitions next year. So the three things that are being changed or gotten rid of, no scrums off a free kick anymore. The croc roll is going to be banned in the breakdown and tackle area, Jonny, and then the offsides around kicks, the DuPont law as we call it, is going to be fixed up and cleaned up, and the wording around it is going to be changed. I'll start with you as the kind of backs and skills specialist here, and I'll go to Bert maybe on the scrums off free kicks, but on the ending of the DuPont law, I think most people were in favor of it. How do you feel about it?
I feel insulted, first of all, by the backs and skills, because Scrum is the best launch you're ever going to get.
True.
So I think there's actually, I'm being awkward on purpose, but the point about it is that like scrums are actually a great attacking platform. So by taking away scrums, I know what they're trying to do, but they haven't thought about that fully through. I think the scrum isn't ruining the game. I think there's a closed try law at various other levels where they're putting a shot clock on it.
Yeah.
Not the worst thing in the world. I think if you want to speed up scrums, but the actual act of scrummaging is a fascinating and unique part of our game, and I would be all for keeping it. I love talking to props. I might not always know what they're talking about. They might not always either, but I like talking to them. And it's a great attacking platform. The DuPont law was a shocking turn of events as it was. I was so far against it. I was like, I actually at one point was like, how do we even get here? Where did the 10-meter retreat go to, and why aren't we putting a stop to this thing? It's absolutely shocking. It made no sense to allow a fella to run 5 meters and the other guy was on side. I don't know who thought of that, but I'm glad it's gone.
No one has given any consideration to the forwards who just fancy a breather in a match and want to just stand in the center circle when everyone kicks around them. But anyway,
consideration to it. Get moving. The game is
Bernard, the no scrums off free kicks anymore. What are your thoughts on it? People have brought up the obvious situation where an early shove off a scrum, free kick is given. You obviously can't take a scrum again. It's an easy out potentially for a struggling scrum. What are your thoughts?
Okay, I don't like it, to be honest. I think it is a potential get out, and I understand they're trying to make the game quicker. I don't agree with this. I also just think there's a lot of like unintended consequences of the croc roll. So the croc roll is horrific, right? But like it's actually, they'll say it's player safety, but wait till you see if it ends up creating more stoppages, they'll the angle around trying to keep the game faster. So if you're going to clean out a player who's if you've lost that race and the player is in the jackal position, effectively the only way you can get him out, you can only send him north or south now. Okay, so send him north, you gotta like obviously smash him so hard in the back of his back that he goes backwards and he detaches from the ball. So to get someone to do that, you're going to have to come in at speed and a lot of force, right? So that's one consequence. The other way, obviously, if it goes south, is if you pull him back over the ruck, he's going to go head over heels, right? And I think that's a horribly dangerous position for a prone player to go through. So it's going to be harder to shift those players who are latching on the ball. So I think there's going to be more penalties. Okay, more penalties are going to create more lineouts or kicks a goal, which are going to slow the game down as well. So that's just the issue. And I don't know. I'd be really fascinated to see how those collision coaches are going to target that, because it's all well and good saying win the race, be there before, but that's never changed. You know what I mean? Like we know that the defender sometimes wins the race. And if they're in a good body position, yeah, obviously technically they're entitled to be on the ball. But we know that a lot of referees sometimes don't give that penalty straight away anyway. They allow the arriving players to deal with that jackler. So I'm fascinated to see how this is going to unfold. I think what probably will happen is a lot of croc rolls will be missed. Croc rolls will stay in the game. and they'll only really be penalised when someone gets injured and it's looked at as TMO. I think that'll be the net effect. First couple of weeks there'll be lots of penalties, but then it'll settle down. It's like in the amateur game, you know, the lowering the body height. First 3 weeks, 4 weeks, there was a load of penalties, and then it kind of went back to where it was beforehand, you know. And that's what I feel. Whereas the other ones, the punt law was a joke, so that's great. It's been fixed. And the scrum one, I'm not keen on, but let's see how it plays out.
So that, Neil, I think is there referee interpretation on purposeful cheating at the scrum, which is something we've been trying to get out of the game for the whole lot of time. But like obviously you do it once and it's free kick, you do it again and it's penalty, so you're going to be picking up the park. And I think your argument is that you can do it once when you're on your line, keep it up your sleeve for when you need it, and that is, you know, there's always going to be another side to things. So that is the obvious one. But if a referee thinks their scrum has been poor all day and they've just jumped the gun, are they actually going to penalise that? I think they'd find it very hard to. But maybe that situation is there. Birch, on the poach, I have a fear now, and I'm someone who I lost my career to a poach, which is a funny thing to say as a 10. But it looks like they're reviewing the ability to poach at all in the rest of that announcement. And is it going to come back to a shove over the ball and no one actually poaching and hinging their hips, which would be a massive, massive change, and it'd be all counter rucking and blasting. And would that just end up with a lot of scraps on the ground and people just piling into rucks and ending up dead?
Well, I actually think there's already been a massive increase in counter rucking, Johnny, and I think it's very dangerous. Sorry, it's leading to a lot of dangerous positions for and bodies being taken left, right, etc. And so and if there's a more of a focus on that, it'll be even become more chaotic. And actually, there'll be unintended headshots in that pushing contest and trying to change body position last minute, etc. But look, it's a very tricky game to referee, and the lawmakers are trying to keep it safe but make it faster. So we have to, suppose, wait and see how it all plays out.
I think that's it. We're talking about how it's I don't know about that law change and I don't know about that law change, but it's a game that is very, very hard to manage at the moment with the speed, the physicality of players, and the danger that we're putting players in. There is no right answer at the moment, is there?
No.
Very quickly, following on, I suppose, from the player safety side of things, that explanation from Friday, they also say that in terms of those the law I suppose experiments or trials that they're going to be running out over the next few years in various competitions, some being the World Rugby Under-20 Championship, is they're continuing to trial out this 20-minute red card, which is being used in Super Rugby at the moment as well. I did some quick maths there last Thursday or Friday when it came up. My numbers are out of date now, obviously, because there have been matches since, but through 120 URC games this season, there have been 12 red cards. Through 60 games in the Super Rugby Pacific, there have been 10 red cards. So a red card for every 12 URC, a red card for every 10 URC games compared to a red card for every 6 Super Rugby games. I'm not sure the 20-minute red card seems to be working if you're at those numbers in Super Rugby.
Well, I don't like it. I absolutely flat out don't like what are you really doing? Like, it's a red card because it's a red card offence. Like, what are you actually doing? And we've had 3 red cards with Cork on this year: a tackle in the air, a high shot, and a low shot with no arm. Fair enough. I never once wanted those players back or a substitution of 20 minutes. You take your medicine. Like, we've set up that way. We've made an error that way. We won 2 and lost 1 with those red cards. We were actually losing, I think, when we got the red card against Terranure in the round of 15 or whatever it was. So, like, I don't know who's asking for their player to be put back on the pitch when they get a red card. Like, we don't ask for a yellow card to be 5 minutes. Like, I don't understand it. I think it's a shocking thing to do.
I think it's been driven in New Zealand and Australia, where falling crowds, lack of appetite. They're just trying to find ways of keeping the game entertaining. I think their fear is that a game becomes one-sided or could become one-sided, but the data, like we've all seen games where, and we know one very recently, where despite being having inferior numbers, you can still win, and I think that adds to the drama, and it can also help an underdog. If Leinster get a red card early against Ulster the weekend, you know, it gives Ulster a better chance, and that's but that'll be Leinster being punished for indiscipline. So I'm against it completely as well.
Well, Johnny, I mean, like, as you pointed, like AIL final a few weeks ago, going down numbers didn't stop you, did it?
And that's the thing. Like, I mean, you can't always find that emotional pitch every week, but I mean, there's consequences to what you do. Like, I mean, I don't understand why you want people to get away with it. And falling crowds, we've enough examples, like Birch said, that it adds to the drama. Like, our final has been spoken about because of the red card, and we've won it. You know, so I'm sure it's a bit of a kick in the teeth to Cherry and all the rest of it, but like that added massively to the AIL drama. And like, if we lost the game, it would have been hugely disappointing. I would have felt very bad for the player involved. But that's the game. Like, we're not. I just wholeheartedly against it. The game still goes on. You find an emotional pitch. You find reactions and drama. It shouldn't reduce crowds because someone has been ill-disciplined. What will reduce crowds is and playing participation is if we're taking the heads off people
Yeah.
every 20 minutes in play. Like, that's not good enough.
Yeah, and I think if that had been a 20-minute red card in the AIL final and you had gone on to win the game, I think there would have been a lot of unhappy people down in the Terranure clubhouse that evening. Very, very, very final thing. I know I've said final thing twice now, but it popped up yesterday evening. Rory O'Loughlin, ex-Leinster centre and one cap Ireland international, who's been over at Exeter for the last couple of years, forced to retire, age of 30. Picked up a bad shoulder injury at the start of the season, and unfortunately, it just hasn't healed. Bernard, I was trying to think back. Would you
I coached him, yeah.
involved with him in Michael's? Yeah, I was
Yeah,
trying to think that it's
he
just
was on the
such a
same
pity
team.
for a player like that.
Yeah, and look, he's one of those lads who decided to leave Leinster and go and get a different experience somewhere else. Became a really important player of Leinster in terms of his versatility, particularly with so many internationals in the centre and wing. Top player. I know Baxter and Exeter really loved him as well, and he did great over there. So he's already had a great career. It's obviously sad when a player has to retire a little bit early, but he's achieved a huge amount, and I'm sure he'll be very successful. Very bright guy as well. So I'm sure he'll be very successful whatever he turns his hat to next.
Would you have just come across him towards the tail end of your time or start of his, Johnny? I was trying to figure out was there any overlap there?
I'm not actually sure, but I've watched him enough to
Yeah.
know the player that he was, and he was absolutely important to Leinster, especially in those times when you need a certain caliber of player to bring them through the Six Nations. Like, obviously he has an Ireland cap and would have liked to have gotten more. And I think, to talk about him in a kind of a Leinster gap like that is actually doing a disservice to him. He's a really, really good player, and it's I obviously feel the brunt of any retirement. I look at him quite closely at times, weeping. But but it's no, it's sad. I don't like players having to stop like that, and he's a brave lad going to Exeter and all that kind of stuff. So he was class for Leinster. He has some good highlight reels. He's a class player. So it's I'm sorry to see him go to the game.
Yeah, best wishes to him for the future, Rory O'Loughlin in his retirement. Fellas, thanks a million. That was great. That's it for this week's podcast. You can watch Connacht against the Stormers this Saturday evening on RT2 and RT Player. There'll be live score updates on RT.ie and updates on Saturday Sport as well on RT Radio 1, followed by live commentary on Saturday Sport on RT Radio 1 of Ulster against Leinster from 7:35 at Kingspan Stadium. Fellas, thanks a million.